Tens of thousands of years ago, the Earth was not as it is today, with only one kind of human walking across plains, deserts, mountains and forests. Instead, the world was home to a variety of human species who lived side by side in some regions and far apart in others. They were all part of the same broad family of hominins, descendants of earlier ancestors who had learned to walk upright and who had spread from Africa to other parts of the world. They shared much with us. They made tools, hunted animals, gathered plants, formed social groups, and adapted to their surroundings. Yet, each species was unique and adapted to the environment it called home, and each contributed in its own way to the long evolutionary story that ultimately left us, Homo sapiens, as the last surviving branch. Among the most famous of our ancient cousins were the Neanderthals. They lived mostly in Europe and Western Asia and thrived in colder regions, where they developed strong muscular bodies that helped them endure harsh Ice Age climates. They were not brutish as once thought, but were intelligent, skilled hunters who crafted sophisticated stone tools and weapons. They used fire to cook and keep warm. They lived in social groups that cared for one another, and there is evidence that they even tended to their injured and sick, showing a sense of compassion. Their cultural life extended further than survival alone, because in caves across Europe, archaeologists have discovered pigments, jewellery and symbolic carvings that suggest Neanderthals expressed themselves through art. They also buried their dead, which is one of the clearest signs of ritual behaviour and a consciousness of life and death. Modern humans today who live outside of Africa carry between 1 and 2% of Neanderthal DNA, which means that when our species met theirs, we not only competed, but also interbred and exchanged genetic material. Their legacy, well, it literally runs in our blood. While Neanderthals are known from many fossils and sites, another group, the Denisovans, remains more mysterious. Discovered only in the 21st century from fragments of bone and teeth in a cave in Siberia, they have no complete skeleton to show us what they looked like. Yet their DNA has opened an entire hidden chapter of human history. Denisovans were close relatives of Neanderthals, but distinct enough to form their own lineage. Their genetic traces have been found widely across Asia, and especially among populations in Oceania and the Pacific. Modern people in those regions carry a higher percentage of Denisovan DNA than anywhere else. Some of these inherited genes proved useful, such as one variant that helps Tibetan populations live in the thin air of high altitudes without difficulty. The Denisovans show us that even species we once thought unknown still live within us, in fragments of DNA that carry adaptations shaped by thousands of years of survival in varied landscapes. If Neanderthals and Denisovans were our northern cousins, the small-bodied Homo floresiensis represented a very different human experiment on a remote island in Indonesia. Discovered on Flores in 2003, these tiny humans stood just over a metre tall, and their brains were about the size of a chimpanzee's. Yet they were skilled tool makers and hunters, adapted to an island environment where small size was actually advantageous. Scientists believe they may have survived until as recently as 50,000 years ago, which means that, for a brief time, they may have overlapped with modern humans arriving in the region. The discovery of Homo floresiensis astonished the world, because it showed that even as recently as the deep past, humans could evolve in unusual ways, creating unexpected forms that challenge our idea of what it means to be human. Equally surprising was the discovery in South Africa of Homo naledi, whose remains were found in the Rising Star cave system. Their bodies combined primitive features with modern-like traits. They had small brains, about a third the size of ours, yet the evidence strongly suggests that they deliberately placed their dead in the cave chambers. This was once thought to be a behavior that required large brains and complex culture, but Homo naledi challenged this assumption. They lived about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, overlapping with early Homo sapiens in Africa. The idea that such a small-brained species could engage in symbolic or ritual activity forces us to reconsider the very nature of intelligence and culture in human evolution. The story would not be complete without mentioning Homo erectus, which might be called the pioneer of humanity. Emerging nearly 2 million years ago in Africa, Homo erectus spread across vast distances into Asia and possibly Europe. They were the first to control fire, which transformed their diet, allowed them to expand into new environments, and shaped social life around shared hearths. They created more advanced stone tools than their predecessors and adapted successfully to many different landscapes. Homo erectus endured for an astonishingly long time, almost 2 million years, making them one of the most successful human species in history. Without them, the later evolution of Neanderthals, Denisovans and modern humans might not have been possible because they were the trailblazers who proved that humans could adapt beyond Africa. Yet, despite their achievements, each of these species eventually disappeared, leaving only Homo sapiens to carry the torch of humanity. The reasons for their disappearance are still debated, but most scholars believe it was a combination of factors. Climate change was one constant challenge as ice ages came and went and environments shifted. Species adapted to certain conditions, sometimes struggled when those conditions changed. Competition for resources likely played a role too, as modern humans spread across the globe with flexible strategies and possibly more extensive social networks. Interbreeding also blurred the lines, rather than leaving sharp extinctions, since some genes of Neanderthals and Denisovans live on in us. But in the end, the separate species dwindled and vanished until only we remained. The survival of Homo sapiens was not inevitable. We were one branch among many, and at several points our own numbers dwindled dangerously low. Yet, through adaptability, cooperation and innovation, we endured and eventually spread to every corner of the globe. Today we stand alone as the last humans, but we are not truly alone because fragments of those ancient cousins remain in our DNA, and their stories remain written in fossils, tools and cave walls. They remind us that humanity was once a family with many faces. Some robust and cold adapted, others small and island bound, some with large brains and others with small, but all of them human in their own ways. Reflecting on this lost diversity, we see that the history of humanity is not a straight line from primitive to advanced, but a branching tree with many experiments in survival, culture and adaptation. The disappearance of our cousins left us the sole inheritors of the Earth, yet their legacy continues to shape who we are and how we understand ourselves. When we look at our hands, our faces, our ability to create art and technology, we are seeing the echoes of a shared past with Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo naledi and Homo erectus. They were not failures, but chapters in a long and complex story that ultimately gave rise to us, the only surviving humans, but not the only humans who ever lived.